Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Teach, Sleep, Repeat. This is episode 17 and we are so excited to be able to introduce our first ever guest. So
and my name's Hayden.
Oh, sorry.
You forgot about me, mate.
Listen, I had some feedback recently from my own family, by the way, who said, isn't Hayden funny? You do interrupt him a lot though, don't you? You do interrupt him a lot. So I was like, okay.
Thank you, family.
Apparently that's the thing. Hayden, shush. Thank you. I'm talking. Don't never interrupt me. But we do have our first ever guest. We're so excited. You've seen in the title. But firstly, Hayden, as always, how's your week been?
Do you know what, mate? Doesn't matter. I'm too excited.
Stop talking. Thank you.
It was great. Let's crack on. Let's crack on.
Okay, I agree actually. But my week was actually really
No, Dylan, you're not getting it. Let's not talk about our weeks. Let's crack on, mate. Let's get to the guest.
It was a good week. It was a good week, but I've decided personally, I've decided that we're gonna not do anything to do with the week. That was my decision as a lead anchor. So we're gonna go straight in if that's all right, Hayden. Don't know about your week.
Fine.
Yes, shush, don't hear you. Let's hear from our guest. Okay, so we are super excited to be introducing our first ever guest on the Teach, Sleep, Repeat podcast. This person has a huge social media presence. She helps out so many teachers by making amazing resources, blog posts, such a positive influence on the community. And we feel so lucky to have her as our first guest. Hayden, give us a drum roll, please. It is the one, the only Sophie Bartlett.
Thank you very much, both of you. It's very kind.
Sophie, thank you so much for coming on. So we'll start off just by letting the listeners know who you are, what you do. And I'm just glad that I'll have people stop messaging me saying, when you're getting someone on the podcast, you said you do it. So it's going to happen now. Okay. So first things first, what got you into teaching? How long have you been doing it?
So this is, I'm actually on maternity leave this year, as a lot of you probably know, but I'm slowly going back into school. So this is technically my 9th year. So when I officially go back in September, it'd be my 10th year, which sounds crazy. I can't believe it's a decade now. What got me into it? Time goes so fast, isn't it? My mum was a teacher. She retired a couple of years ago, but actually she never sold teaching to me. She was purposely not positive or not negative about it because she wanted me to make my own choice. But I've just always loved kids really and just spending time with them, and I was actually a gymnastics coach for about 8 years, crossed over a little bit with my teaching career. So obviously that's teaching kids gymnastics instead of school, and I just loved doing that. And so I never thought I was going to be a teacher right up until I had to decide what I needed to do, and it was just the obvious choice then. So yeah, that's what got me into it.
It's quite very often you ask a teacher how they got into teaching and they say, my parents were teaching. It's in the family, isn't it? And it's interesting you said definitely. Your mum never kind of pushed it on you, because I know a colleague I used to work with whose mum was a teacher who taught me at school. Right. And when he was training to be a teacher, he also taught me in the same school. So he's a bit older. Wow. And his mum spent the whole time trying to convince him not to do it. And he did it anyway.
I wonder if he regrets it now.
Yeah. But it's very often.
Did your mum ever comment on how teaching's changed over the time that you've been in the career, or since she started to, she's just retired?
Yeah, quite a lot actually, particularly now that obviously I'm going back to work with a child, because I'm really worried about how I'm going to balance, work and life. And she went back straight into full time because they had to. So we often talk about how she balanced that, but also just things like, she retired only a couple of years ago, so she's kind of used to how it is now. But she said at the beginning of her career, it would be, they'd be in the staff room at lunchtime, go to the pub at lunchtime, as they often did on a Friday, and then just say, what we do this afternoon? Let's teach an art lesson on, paint some sunflowers, because it was just a lot more laid back and chilled right at the beginning of her career, I think. Yeah. So she's been through it when it's started to get kind of more stressful and more workload intense and a lot more demands from the powers that be. So yeah, she definitely doesn't miss it now, I think.
Yeah. No, we've heard stories from our staff who said Friday was the day where they did that.
Yeah.
And I do think though, my gut instinct there is, although it's funny and you laugh and you say, haha, I think it's much better that we have more accountability now though, in general. But you're right, it feels like it's almost gone too far, hasn't it? And the pressures now, it's like two ends of the spectrum there. I want to know the date where it was right in the middle. Maybe it was just one special day where it was just the right balance. We'll go back
to that point and just relive it.
Yeah. That'd be great. Just as we started on the career, I reckon, about around there. Yeah. So obviously you said you've been teaching now for 9 coming to 10 years. Across that time, what roles have you been involved in within the primary school? Have you always just been a teacher? Have you ever embarked on kind of different roles in that time?
So I've actually always and only taught upper key stage 2. I have tried to venture the other way, but especially anyone that's been in year 6 knows it's quite hard to go out because not many people want to go in. Yeah. So I've taught year 5 and 6 together and then the year group separately. And I've been a student mentor a few times as well. And I've led reading separately, grammar separately, writing separately, and then all of them together. And so currently at the moment, I'm English lead and curriculum. So a bit of history, geography, science with my colleague. We sort of do it all together. So yeah, I've never touched on sort of maths. I love maths myself, but I feel like my strengths are more in English in terms of leading a subject. So yeah, that's what I've done.
So in terms of like a passion, because I do find that most teachers have a passion. Anyone listening will know that mine and Dylan's is maths. Even if we try to hide it, it still always comes across. Would you say English is your subject? Is that the one?
Yeah, reading, writing, and grammar. I do love my grammar, so yeah, that would be mine.
Yeah, fair enough.
Did you see Michael Rosen's post about the grammar test?
I did, because I quote tweeted it as a little opportunity to promote my own blog as well.
How did you?
I did. Yeah, I thought his blog was really good. It picked up on some really good points, actually. Yeah.
For me, as a non-year 6 teacher, so obviously every year, like all teachers do, we look through the papers, right? And I'm not really massively clued into like the niche of the grammar test. Like I know all the grammar terms as a teacher, but the things that really popped out for me were the questions on formality. And I kind of thought it felt like there was 2 questions on formality. It felt like in the first one, you could get rid of some options because there were contractions. That's quite an obvious way to kind of find out if it's more or less formal. But I really kind of struggled to understand how I would teach formality in the second question, where there were no contractions, but it was simply just word choice. And it felt a bit it felt a bit flaky to me. I don't know what you thought about that.
Well, it's also, I suppose, like Michael Rosen argued, some of it's quite subjective. Well, it feels like it could be quite subjective as well. And whenever I've taught it before, I don't know about you, Hayden, I basically go through a checklist of like formal writing can't have contractions, they can't have question tags, you probably wouldn't use a dash, like literally like a tick box thing, because some children really struggle to see the nuance in standard English or formal English and informal English. So the questions like that do just feel unfair. I mean, obviously, I love the fact that I think probably the one you're referring to, because most of them are tick box questions. So the chances are hopefully they can eliminate a couple of obvious ones that are wrong and then hopefully get the right one. But it does feel like a bit of an unfair question, I think.
I found as a year 6 teacher, and I'm sure you have as well, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners have, that you do just kind of fall down into this hole over the years, I find anyway, of like what Michael Rose is saying with the GPS, of just like you start teaching these things and you go, oh, that's a really good way of teaching that. And then you kind of like self-affirm, oh, that's clearly important. I've taught that really well. And then when I read his blog, it kind of burst my bubble a little bit. I was like, oh my God, you know what? So much of this stuff, like, what am I doing? So much of this stuff really isn't that. It's just not that important. And the terminology has changed, which I always find funny over the years. And Michael Rosen saying, well, I'd fail now because when I was a kid, they all had different names. So what are we doing? Like, what's the point?
I know. I remember I had like some resources from when I started teaching that had connectives written on them. And I'd gone through and scribbled them all out and put conjunctions. That's not connecting. That's a conjunction. And then, look, you're right. When you step back and think about it, you think, who cares? Like, what is this? But you just have to be so you're so adamant that you're doing the right thing for the kids and they're going to do well in this grammar test. And then they go to secondary school and, you know, grammar is obviously important, but some of the level of the grammar that we're teaching is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you could almost divide it. I genuinely reckon we could sit there together and go through a paper and basically put a line between types of questions of like, this is actually useful and I would refer to this in their writing all the time. Like, it's good for them to know this. And this is what, you know, do they really need to know the different types of verb forms and verb tenses? Like, do they really need to know the names of that, as long as they can kind of use them correctly in their writing? But that's, you know,
I know someone, usually a post we get on the Facebook group is, how on earth have you taught the subjunctive? And I have to admit, the last few years I've just said I don't teach it because it's maximum 1 mark on the grammar test, which doesn't really matter anyway. Or if I do, I'll just stick on a YouTube video of Beyonce singing, you know, If I Were a Boy, and just be like, look, if it says if I were, that's a subjunctive. If you remember that, great. And if you don't, you know, it doesn't matter.
I was literally about to say that exact song is the one, isn't it, that everyone uses. My class were yelling at me this year because I couldn't remember who sung that song. And they were so offended when they were like, it's Beyonce.
What's a letdown?
It's Beyonce.
We've got I'm sorry, we've got Miss B here. How can you not get a Beyonce song?
I know, Queen Bee, Miss B. I'm sorry. But anyway,
right. I want to jump in now because I'm going to do a quick response. Okay, so I'm going to say one word. It's all to do with education, all to do with teaching, And I just want your first word, one word answer. Okay. So for example, if I said to Hayden cream egg, he would say
delicious.
Okay.
So, okay.
But it's not going to be cream egg.
Do a serious one.
It'll be this is another example, Hayden. It'll be something like, okay, I might just say maths. Hayden?
For me, that would be passionate, because that's my reaction to that word.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Okay, just first thought. Okay. Marking.
Awful.
Good answer. We're nodding. I love that. Strong start. Okay. I'm going to do these quickly now, all right?
Yeah.
Staff room treats.
Love.
Parents' evening. Reports.
No.
Sats.
Change.
I like that.
That's good. Teacher wellbeing.
Important.
Afternoon lessons.
Struggle.
Teaching PE.
Depends.
I'm going to come back to that. And the big one, we've got to be careful here. Ofsted.
Controversial?
Nice. Good answers there. There were some good discussion points coming from that as well.
That was hard. I'm sweating.
Do you know what? I'm going to tell you something. As the first ever guest on this podcast, that is the first time we've done that. And actually, I felt bad at some points making you think of something on the spot.
I just think whichever one I answered to, I'm really sorry because that's not a word, but that was genuinely what that came from.
I was trying to keep it together. I was like, did she say air? Is there something I missed here?
It was literally meh. Oh, yeah. Wasn't quite sure how to answer that one.
That was parents' evening, and I think you actually perfectly summed it up because it's very useful. I really enjoy talking to parents about their children, but gosh, it's long, isn't it? It is long.
Oh yeah, I think I would structure it differently, but I do love the conversations one at a time. It's just a lot at once, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No. Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. That was fun. So we're going to dive straight in now. Okay, so into a bit more of a meaty discussion, because I think the big reason why Hayden and I wanted to have a chat with you is because you kind of strike this really cool balance to us, and we struggle with this because lately in the profession, I feel like it's very easy to kind of descend into almost like resentment about the whole situation. We're at a point now where, all of the teaching unions are balloting again to carry on striking. Nothing seems to be getting sorted. Our schools are underfunded. Our real terms pay cut over the years. And for Hayden and I, we struggle, I think, to kind of keep that real positivity and love for learning, because we've still got that. We still love teaching the children, but it's kind of being overtaken now by the fact that it's just becoming less and less of a we're not really taken as seriously as we'd like by the government.
Yeah.
And one thing the impression we get from you, especially online, is that you have a really good balance of speaking out for the things that are important, protecting our schools, but also managing to keep on, producing these these documents, these blogs that really help other teachers, and that kind of fostering that passion of going above and beyond. We feel like there's a real problem that's going to be eroded away eventually, because people just think, well, what's the point? And just really wondering, how do you personally feel about that? The kind of the comparison there of wanting to go above and beyond and be passionate, but thinking, well, what's the point? Because we're not getting rewarded for it.
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky, and I will admit, especially being on maternity leave, I at the beginning really struggled with the idea of going back, because I think when you take a step away from the classroom and you don't see all the joy, because I'm sure you can agree that the joy for me was between 8:45 and 3:15, just shutting the classroom door, being with the kids, and the buzz that you get from that is unparalleled by anything else. So when you don't have that day to day and you can just see it from the outside, it's like, oh, do I really want to go back to that? Because like you say, just what people are sharing on social media, it's quite negative at the minute, and totally understandable because of the things that people are having to put up with. But now that I've started to go back for kit days and I'm getting my head back in the game, the first time I went back in after like 9 months, my colleague had me cover her class for something, and I just forgot I had a child for one, but just thought, oh my gosh, I love this. It's like I stood up, I just felt completely myself in front of the kids. I think that's why most teachers are in it, because of their, the relationship you get with the kids and just the sense of fun that you can get from doing it. And that sort of reignited my passion, really. Also, just I'm genuinely interested in education, the politics behind it, and just how pedagogy and how to teach things well, and the way things have changed over the years. Because I remember training at uni, and it was all about never tell the kids anything. You have to ask questions and elicit everything from the children, and all, don't just say it how it is. And now it's, well, some people would say flipped the other way, and it's a lot of just say it, teach it to them, and then they've got it a lot quicker than you trying to pick at them, like get them to say it by asking questions. Sort of a sage on the stage versus guide on the side, that kind of theory. But it's just interesting to see how that's changed within 10 years of teaching. Is really quite a short amount of time compared to a lot of the really experienced teachers that are out there. In that short amount of time, the way of teaching well from that some people think has changed so much. And so keeping up with different educational trends, it's just interesting. But I feel like I've wandered so much from the question you asked me now, just because I've talked
it's
so
fascinating.
Much about.
No, this is why we ask it though, because you're right, and that is, you are answering the question though. Like, that's the reason how you manage to stay positive, keep posting things, because Hayden and I sometimes feel like we're in a downward spiral of getting annoyed about something, therefore thinking, well, I won't bother doing that then, and then I'll just do this and I'll do that, and it kind of just, and then you won't get as much out of education as you would have before. If you find you have, well, I've got to do this whole week of planning all of a sudden because maybe your timetable changes. 5, 6, 7 years ago, that would excite me. I'd be like, I'm going to get my teeth into this.
So much of this job, which we've discussed before, does rely on teachers just goodwill, doing things in their own time. We've talked extensively before on the podcast about directed time, and we've joked about it. We've taken the mick out of how there's this system of directed time, which is technically kind of like how our pay structure as well. But then there's this enormous list of jobs that we actually have to do as teachers and we're expected to do that aren't remotely factored into this directed time, which is a full-time job of ours. And it does it. The job relies on you being okay with that and doing them anyway. And definitely feeling that pressure of, hang on a minute, I'm 7-8 years in. Why am I doing this again? Because this is impacting my life. But then, like you said, because we're exactly the same, I'll stand in front of that classroom in the morning, and then the day just goes by like this. And I think, my God, if I was in a different job, I would have hated every minute of that. But 8 hours has whizzed past because I thoroughly enjoyed teaching the children.
They do give you that joy of I personally really don't like marking or planning, depending on what it is, but that if you put together a good lesson, then when you stand up and deliver it to the kids, or do you know what, even if you put together a rubbish lesson and it goes really badly, and sometimes, I don't know if this has happened to you before, I've just said, do you know what, that was really bad, wasn't it? Should we do that again tomorrow? And then they just laugh, and it's not going to impact them if they have one bad lesson. And if anything, I feel like it makes them trust you a bit more because they know that you're getting it wrong as well. And it's just having such a special bond with the class is something that can't be replicated, I don't think.
So do you think, as a teacher, sorry Hayley, do you think that is the number one most important thing, that is to build that bond with your children? Because I can't think of, I know that subject knowledge, having all the pedagogy like you've spoken about, but that's very cyclical. That comes around, that goes around, that will change year on year, as long as we're keeping up with it. And almost like an arbitrary judgment, because like you said, something that 10 years ago would have been really frowned upon is now looked at as really good practice in the classroom. I see only one constant in teaching, and that's building strong relationships with the children to bring them on the way with you, make sure they enjoy being in the classroom, and then almost from there's about 8 different ways you can teach stuff, in my opinion, that's still going to get it across to them.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think a lot of people say you're not there to be their friend, which is true, but also it doesn't matter how good you are at a subject. If those children know that you don't like them or they don't respect you, they're not going to listen to a word you say or take anything in. And from speaking to parents, and now it's funny how much your perspective changes when you have a child. I mean, I know my son's only 8 months, but already, obviously, you've got a picture of what they're going to be like when they're older. Parents just want you to like their child, because that's their whole world. So if you can, and there's something to like in every single child, no matter how difficult some children can be, if you can find something to like and find that special bond with each person in their class, that child is going to listen to you. At least that's number one. So I completely agree with what you're saying. That bond is definitely the most important thing.
I've also found that, with just expanding on that point of there's something to like in every child, and there's a bond you can make, that I found that in my career, that's where you can make the absolute biggest difference to a child's life. It's the social side for me. There are children who I've seen their behavior across a year change enormously, which has then impacted everything else. Like their learning behaviors then get better, they can make better progress. And you think, God, so much of that is dependent on their relationships with the adults around them, and mainly you, because you are the classroom teacher. It's super important.
And you know what's really tricky on that? You might come on to it, so it might cross over, but we're measured by SATs, which is their academic progress. And there's so many things that to me are way more beneficial that you can't measure. Like a child who at the beginning of the year might not even sit still in their chair and be wandering around or throwing things or shouting, who at the end of the year is sitting down and listening and is happy and learning. That is such a huge impact, but it's not measured by anyone. So it's just so frustrating.
Do you think, a really wide perspective now, just thinking about the UK and our culture of teaching and education, do you think we've gone too far down the SATs route of like data is the most important thing, academic progress is the most important thing? Do you feel like we've got the balance there, or do you really just feel like we absolutely don't do any of the other stuff at all?
No, I think it's obviously varies school by school, but from a bigger picture, I do think data's become far too it's too much weighting is put on data. Obviously, yes, we need to hold schools accountable for things and we need to measure schools somehow and judge them, but you can't just do that by numbers. And I've seen, teachers or leaders then they see children as a number or a piece of data because that is what they're being measured on. You can't blame them for doing that because they're held to account by that, but I feel like it just changes the whole vibe because they're now 2% of your data. They're not this child that has difficulties here and strengths here and that going on and this going on. So yeah, it definitely changes some people's perspectives, I think, of teaching.
It's so true. I get the ick sometimes, and like you said, I completely get it. But when we start referring to children as low achievers or high ability, that word of ability, it's like, cool, that's high ability in something really specific that the school's been pressured to have on a pedestal. And it's like, okay, what's their ability to make a friend? What's their ability to comfort someone? And I think like we can become obsessed with these small margins on academia. And that's our main job, isn't it? It really is. We are there to be teachers and academic sides, but I value all the other stuff just as equally. And do we need to sit there and measure that? I don't think we do, but I think we just need to put the respect on it, like you've been saying. That is progress, isn't it? It's different progress, but it's progress.
And I think a lot of parents would probably put maybe equal or maybe more emphasis on that. I mean, I know academics is obviously important, but I think a lot of parents would prefer that their children be happy and know how to make friends and be resilient rather than be able to pass a SATs test at the end of the year. So, and we're catering for parents, our service is for parents. So you think we would want to know what they want us to do with their children.
Well, it's so true. That kind of, for me, at the start of my career, when I did parents' evenings and stuff, I wrote reports. I would kind of think it was really important to like put in specific objectives and stuff. And I would say like, they're doing really well with place value actually. And actually, they need to work a little bit on it's like, well, that's my job. My job is to, that's I'm going to react to that. And I'm going to do that in my lessons. Actually, from a parent's point of view, and this is what we lead every parents' evening with now, and what I focus more on, because it's report writing season, I'm doing it now, is a lot more on the whole picture of actually, what's your child done as a human being? One part of it is academia, but the other part is I'm going to talk about their friendships. I'm going to talk about how they've got on the playground. I'm going to talk about their group work, because in real life, a lot of stuff, the academic stuff, you can pick that up later if children aren't as good at it, and at that point in their time in school. I just think that whole picture, you're right, it's much more powerful. And I think that does lead back into what we said about being passionate and positive still, is no matter what happens with the government or the politics or the newspapers, we're on ground zero, we're stood in front of the kids. That makes us happy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got a good question for you here. Obviously, you've got quite a big following on Twitter. And just social media in general. And I'm sure a lot of those people are teachers maybe in their first couple of years of teaching, and they might be looking up to you for advice, as we do as well. That's why we've got you on the show, because we think you give really good advice. But if you were able to go back in time and speak to your ECT self, it would have been an NQT then, your first year of teaching, and you could pick a piece of advice to kind of give yourself, or even it's big or small, what do you think that would be, given your experience now?
Well, that's a good question. I like that question. What would it be? I think it would be to not stress so much about every single lesson and what goes wrong in every single lesson, because sometimes I get to the end of the day, and rather than picking out all the positives, it would be, well, 5 children didn't understand that maths at all, this person left upset because of this friendship thing, and I go through all the things that went wrong, when actually, that in the grand scheme of things, yes, that's probably a big deal for that child on that day, or they need to learn that math at some point. But that's one day out of however many across the school year, 130, 196 or whatever it is. And you can just start afresh the next day. And really it's about the journey over the entire year, not just that one day. And don't beat yourself up over a bad lesson, a bad day, a bad week, because you've got time to fix it. Because you can put so much, especially at the beginning of your career, you put so much energy into individual lessons. And yeah, that is really good, but you need to save yourself a little bit, or you're going to burn out really quickly, aren't you?
Listen, guys, you heard it here first.
I remember my very first day that I did a full day in my PGCE, and I went home and I genuinely thought, this can't be a job.
Did you just flop on the sofa and like not get up?
I couldn't believe it, and like almost going to what you're saying there of just telling yourself it gets better, don't worry about it, because you put so much, don't you, into every minute.
Yeah, I know. Crazy. I mean, I think now, I mean, you've probably done this too. I do put a lot of effort into the mornings, and it gets to the afternoon, and sometimes I will just like pick up the lesson plan 5 minutes before I teach the lesson, or sometimes make it up on the spot. I'm not going to lie. I've made up a lesson on the spot.
It's the 90s all over again. We're going to paint sunflowers.
We've all done it. But I think that's the good thing about being a bit more experienced, but also having a good relationship with your class. Because if things go wrong, then they don't care, because you know that you can control the behavior and you're still teaching them. Because as a teacher, you've got those instincts of teaching something. But sometimes you have to just make things up as you go along. Even if you've got a lesson plan and it goes wrong, you've got to suddenly change the direction of the lesson, haven't you? So you can't plan everything.
I've spent a lot of time before, well, every week making math slides, and when we were younger, newer, we'd put so much effort into these slides, and over the years, you realize actually the best bit is coming from the teacher and them and the quiz, and there's a lot more stripped back now on the slides, but even to the point now where our planning is our slides, so that's what we do. But even to the point where I'll make some slides and I'll find that 45 minutes into the lesson that I've just been modeling things on the board, they've been doing stuff in front of them with their manipulatives, that we've just been doing maths together, and I've kind of led it in a way that they're going to learn what they're doing, and then I realize like I've got six slides here and I've not gone through any of them, but it was one of my best lessons that I've taught.
I remember once, because I used to go and watch my mum teach before I qualified, and I said, "Oh, can I see your lesson plan for this?" And she literally just held up a Post-it note and it had like 2 bullet points on it. She was like, "Yeah, I planned it yesterday." I was thinking, I can't wait to get to that point, and now I'm at that point, and I think it's great to have that experience behind you and that bank of knowledge of ways of teaching that you can just go, my lesson on triangles is this, this, and this, and it's just in my head. It's obviously a different story when a school requests planning, but obviously that's a different issue. separate
I remember also being in like kind of like that training period time, and I know a lot of other people were actually quite resentful of the more experienced teachers that were doing those sorts of things. But I felt like I always understood early on, and I think you were quite similar, Dylan, that we will get there eventually, but it wouldn't be good practice for us as brand new teachers to do that yet. And I understood that balance. I was like, the reason they can write a Post-it note is because they've taught this 17 times. And they absolutely know the subject in and out, and they will be able to adapt that lesson so amazingly well. And you might have spent 3 hours on a slideshow, but they're 2 slideshow, but going off, off tangent will probably be a better experience.
It does pay off. I just remember being so frustrated if a lesson took me longer to plan than it did to teach. So I was just thinking, like, when is this going to end? And sometimes that is still the case, because you get into a bit of a brain, sometimes, don't you? But
that's not factoring in the marking. That's
exactly.
Hey, we can't turn this into another Director Time podcast. No, we just can't. We can't do it. Right, let's move on. Let's move on to another discussion point. So, in general, this is something I've always thought about, and this is where maybe you can come in as an English lead, a curriculum lead, because I've always struggled with the sheer amount of incredible children's literature, and there are some unbelievable books, and every time a book's recommended, I used to read them a lot more because I just wanted to get into it a bit more and know the subject. But I'm definitely not in that world as much as I'd like to be. And the idea of picking suitable fiction or non-fiction text for your class, if you're doing whole class reading, for example, it can be really quite daunting. And I've seen stories before, especially of more newer teachers who kind of have been told, okay, well, whole class, pick a book and then we'll do some work from that. And that is a vast amount to pick from. And completely. This idea of, okay, so where do you start with that? How do you pick a book that's A, appropriate, and B, can be turned into something that's suitable for a year 4 class or a year 6 class? And it's quite a tricky balance. So as a curriculum leader, an English lead, how would you maybe go about that?
Well, I'll be the first to admit I am not great at reading children's books. A couple of my friends you might know on Twitter, so Emily, Primary Teach, and Cass and Ashley, they read children's books at like loads of them, and I am in awe of them. It's not just that I feel like I don't have the time, because no one has time, but I just want to read. I'm just selfish and want to read my own, adult books. But so I rely on them and social media in general for advice and opinions on what books to use, because there's a wealth of experience and advice out there to choose from. But also just experience of using books. I have repeated loads of books, really, Holes obviously is a gem.
Classic.
Things like Skellig we're doing, I know, when I go back to school in September. So there are just your classics which would be worth doing year upon year. But we are also putting new books in the curriculum as well. And for that, I think, as much as I say I don't have time to read a book, I would, if I'm planning it to teach, I would always read it first and then go on social media and find out other people's opinions of it, especially people who have used it to teach before. Things like, I know some schools use Lexiles. I personally don't like using Lexiles, but I know some schools use them to see if they're a high enough quality for like what vocabulary wise for the children. But yeah, I mean, it can be, it's a bit of some people can be a bit of a loose cannon with just picking a random book, especially we see it quite a lot on the Facebook group. I'm just going to teach from this. And then you see people go, oh, please don't use this instead, use this instead. So I would always advise asking other people what has worked before. Have you read this and is it appropriate? And if not, why not? So yeah, use the advice that's out there. That's what I always do, because I'm not so good at it myself, I'll be honest.
I think it's so important that people hear that message, It even made me feel better just hearing you say that, because, I look at you as quite an influential person in the kind of teaching world. And I do sometimes see people like Ashley Booth and Rob Smith from Literacy Shed and people that are like incredible that are so good at just reading children's literature and posting about it and being a font of knowledge. And sometimes I'm like, oh God, I feel terrible. I'm like, oh, I haven't done that. Like I didn't really know. I haven't read any of these books. He'll post a list of 16 books and I think, I haven't read any of these. And this is the fourth list he's posted. And so it's really nice to hear from someone like yourself who's also really passionate about English that it's just okay. It is okay to rely on each other sometimes. We can't do absolutely everything. And that's made me feel much better.
Oh no, I just think it's a lot to expect. We're so busy as it is. It's a lot to expect teachers to read children's books in their own time. If someone else is doing it for you, like go to I trust them implicitly. I use their advice. And I would always go to them first. But I think I actually put up a tweet a while ago. Someone said never read a book never teach a book without reading it first. And while I do agree with that, usually, sometimes I have picked up a book and read it because I know that I've asked about 10 people first if they think it's a good book. And that particular tweet got so many likes. People go, oh, thank goodness, because I've done this too. And it felt really taboo to admit that you have read a book to a class that you personally haven't read. And I just think, it's great. I get to find out all the things at the same time as the children do. This is a book reading for pleasure, by the way, rather than actually studying it, because I would have read that first. But sometimes it's nice just sharing a book with the children and going on the journey with them, as long as like I said before, you've asked people and it's appropriate and it's got good content.
So. I think we've all been there. I've been there myself as well, having gone to a new school and they've got a kind of a rigid system in place already that I know has been used in previous years. I very much trust the school and the system to have given me a book that I will be able to enjoy and read with the children the first time. So I know what you mean though. But you feel a little bit like, oh, I'm being naughty. Is this the right thing?
I know. I felt like that too.
But it's not. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And again, it's like Hayden said, it's really nice to hear from an English lead, a curriculum lead, and I think it's important as experienced teachers that we spread this kind of message, because I certainly felt like that the whole way through, and I still feel that way now. I sometimes feel like a bit of an imposter teaching reading when I don't think that I'm a specialist in it, if that makes sense. And it's kind of the nature of primary teaching. No way can we all be. We teach 9, 10 different subjects, I think that kind of imposter syndrome almost never leaves you. Like we joked earlier about in the quick response teaching PE. Now I love sport. I watch sport. I play sport, but I am not an amazing PE teacher. I have to really go in before every unit that we do, study it, read through the objectives, think about what the end goal is, and then apply my pedagogies to it. And like you say, your curriculum lead as well. How did you find that kind of leading English as maybe like a passion and then doing bits with geography and history? Did you find that tricky to go into as a leader? Or
oh my goodness, so difficult. And because we had Ofsted a couple of months ago and our deep dive was in history, and my historical knowledge is almost non-existent. Anytime I teach a topic, I have to research or teach it myself beforehand. And if the kids ask me questions, I just go, I'm going to write that down and find it out for you, or let's Google it now, because I don't, and I openly admit that to them. I don't know it myself. But I think the joke when you said about teaching PE, so I used to be a gymnastics coach, so love teaching gymnastics. But things like invasion games, football, rugby, stuff like that, absolutely clueless, not got the foggiest. But the funny story is I had to teach, obviously, DT, which I cannot hate it, and I had to order all the equipment for it. Didn't know what I was doing. Got my dad to pre-cut all the bits of wood that they needed, because I thought that's going to be a disaster to do that in the classroom. Anyway, got to the day where they'd got their pre-cut bits of wood. I'd counted them out. They got all the resources, and it turned out I'd ordered 15 of the wrong type of saw, so we couldn't do any. Not only had I wasted, I mean, my school does know this. Not only had we wasted money on that, but like we couldn't even go ahead with the project. So then I had to take all of those back to my dad to do the bit that we were supposed to do in class. It was just awful. I just think someone else should be doing this, because I am totally messing this up for the children. But at least it was funny.
There is an easy measure for a DT lesson when some of the children start crying because they can't make any of the thing they're supposed to make. We've all been there. I know exactly how you feel.
Yeah.
I've got a story based on this very quick that I remember from last year. It was so funny because I had a class last year where I had a couple of adults in the room always, like some support staff. They were always with us in the classroom. So there were 3 adults in the room at all time. And I'd done what we mentioned earlier. And I'm not afraid to say this, that with this particular lesson, it was something that we'd taken from last year, and we'd taught it last year. Well, I was new to the year group, so this is where it comes in. It had been taught last year. Perfect. Okay, cool. I'd looked at the first few slides, because in the first slide, it had a list of things we need for the lesson. And it was a nice lesson because we were making something. I think it was, I can't remember what the lesson was. I think it's PSHE or RE or something along those lines. And the children had to make an origami Pikachu. And I was like, oh, that's quite cool. And I don't know why. I don't know why we're making origami Pikachus, but we were making origami Pikachu at the end. And I was like, oh, that's awesome, cool. And there was a YouTube link, and I was like, cool, no problem. YouTube link's there, nice one. Taught the lesson, and I really hyped them up. I was like, guys, there's a really cool task. You'll never guess what the task is at the end of this. And they were like, okay, what's it going to be? And we got there, and I was like, right. I pressed next on the slide, picture of Pikachu comes up. We're going to make one of them. And they go mad. They're so happy. Like, oh, what? We're making a Pikachu. Anyway, 4 minutes into the video, 15 kids in tears. The most ridiculously hard bit of origami you've ever seen. Not one of the children made a piece of origami by the end of the lesson.
What is it about folding paper? Kids and following, even me though, to be honest, it's so complicated.
But it was like, it wasn't, the kids, they can do a paper airplane. Oh my God. I couldn't do it. And to the point where I sat there at the front. I had 3 adults helping me. We were trying to make them for the kids so they could just take it home. Honestly, one Pikachu, not one.
This is like, do you remember that show Art Attack with Neil?
Yeah, Buchanan.
It's like, Buchanan. Now if I'm going to do art or DT, I try and do this is one I made earlier from like lunchtime, like eating my pasta and trying to like fold this bit of paper or paint something, just so I know that I can at least try and help the kids when they do it. But we've all been there before.
I was going to say, Sophie, what do you mean? Teachers don't get lunch breaks. What are you on about?
Sorry. It's multitasking.
Eating whilst preparing or marking or doing something.
Yes.
But no, that's great to hear, and I really want to break that stigma as well, because I still fall into that trap of thinking, okay, I'm not an expert at this. I feel much more comfortable doing this lesson. But as teachers, there's so much we can do to still deliver really good lessons. And it goes back to what you said earlier about the relationship with the kids, how important that is to be able to say to them, like you said, you know what, guys, I'm not sure. And we can find this out together by doing this or that. Yeah. It's such a nice way to approach it rather than trying to pretend. I don't think there's any need for that.
No, absolutely.
Sophie,
brilliant.
You work in a 1-form entry, right? A school.
Half-form entry.
Half-form entry, even lower. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. Genuine question for you, and this is just me being curious now, and hopefully there are some people listening thinking, I'd love to know as well. How on earth do you manage that? Because there is so much.
Stop there.
That's it. How do you manage it? Because it's just such a big job.
I know. So my previous school was 2-form entry, and I moved to this school, which I love, by the way. But in my first week there, I think I cried every day. Just putting it out there. It was so different. In my previous school, not only did we work, which was 2-form entry, we didn't work just as a year group team, we worked as a phase team. So there was 4 of us doing all the foundation subject planning. And then obviously we'd share with my year group partner the core subject planning. But you're doing everything on your own. And because it was, we were rewriting the curriculum at the time, so there wasn't really any previous planning you could use either, which is good in a way, because obviously, you get to do anything you want. That is one pro, that you have complete autonomy. But it is insane. And I think I would if you're an ECT, I wouldn't personally recommend going to such a tiny school. I think it's great if you're an experienced teacher and you want the autonomy, but if you either want more of an easy life, sorry, it's not easier working a bigger school, but in terms of planning, I would say from experience, it's a bit easier.
It is easier.
Yeah, it's fine to say. It's like when you say year 6 and the SLT will say, well done to year 6 for the SAT, to be like, well, it was everyone. And I was like, yeah, it was, but it was mainly year 6 as well. So we can say, we can say that something's easier. It is easier in terms of planning.
There's pros and cons, but in that way it is easier. And how did I cope? I don't know. I think it was great that I started when I didn't have a child or anything to go home for. Yeah. And the fact that I'm quite passionate about it meant I didn't mind spending so much time on it, and my colleagues were amazing as well, which really helped. But we did start with quite a few schemes so that we could get things up and running, and slowly sort of phasing out the schemes or keeping schemes that we really like. But I don't know how I coped because I just cried a lot.
Do you feel like SLT had a part to play though in like managing that workload a bit for you, or were you very much left to just like crack on, get it done sort of thing?
No, I mean, again, because we're so small, we pretty much just have a head teacher. That is kind of our only SLT. Yeah. But she is just amazing in terms of expectations because she knows that it's difficult. And she also, like, in terms of SATs as well, there's no like pressure to perform a certain way in the SATs because she knows all the children, all the families really, really well because we're such a small school. So it does help. And she teaches as well still in the classes. So because she keeps her toe dipped in, she knows what it's like. So it definitely helps having an SLT that completely understands and is really supportive as well.
Yeah, that kind of thing does often come from the top down, doesn't it? And it can be easy sometimes. We've talked about this before, this balance between letting staff go above and beyond consistently every week, putting hours and hours in, and whether they say, oh, I want to, it's fine. But there also comes a point as SLT you think, well, I've hit the jackpot there. This person doesn't mind doing this, this, and this. But then there's also a point where they've got to be like, well, we can kick this down the road. We've got a plan. This is our priority now. Our next priority next term can be this. And that management has such an effect for you to kind of be like, okay, that's also part of being a good manager, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's also I said open door policy. I don't really like the phrase, but I know that I can go to my head teacher and if I'm struggling or if I don't like something or I think it's a rubbish scheme, I can openly say that and she'll actually not just go, yeah, okay, that's great, and send me away. She'll actually take my opinion into consideration. So being able to have a two-way conversation, not just being told what to do is has really helped as well.
Okay, before we move on to the discussion point that I'm actually most excited to talk about, I just want to say to any listeners out there, if you would like to follow Sophie on Twitter, you can find her at
@_Missy B. So it's Missy, MISSIE BEE.
Amazing. I highly recommend it because Sophie does share loads of resources, and I know recently you made some analysis of the SATs as well, which I personally, as a Year 6 teacher, found really handy. It was just awesome to look through purely out of curiosity, let alone anything else. So yeah, thank you for doing that. I know a lot of people really appreciate it. So we're going to move on to our last discussion point now, and I know this is something you're passionate about because we've seen you post about it, and I think it's just one of those topics that not a lot of teachers know about. And those that do, there's a lot of controversy perhaps around it or how the way people think about it. So we're going to talk now about shared parental leave, or SPL as it's often shortened to. I'm not going to say too much because I know you might just want to talk about it, but I would like to start you off with a question, really, just to explain to the listeners, what is shared parental leave and what does it have to do with teaching?
Well, I actually only found out about it when I got pregnant. As the title might suggest, it's mainly for, well, not just women, but women going on maternity leave, and then any partners that they have to take parental leave as well. So you can share the leave, but particularly for teachers, it's a great opportunity to add additional income to your maternity pay, which is notoriously poor. So I found out about it from a colleague, and my school have never done it before. So it's completely new to my school. And when I talked to other people, not many people knew about it either. And my husband's in the RAF and he managed to do it as well. And I don't think anyone he knew had done it before. So like I say, it's one of those things that I think people may have heard of, but it just sounds like something that's too much work and isn't worth it. Let me tell you now, it is definitely worth it. So look into it. But it is, obviously, it works differently for different people's situations, but for a teacher, but you can basically share your parental leave. So as a woman going on maternity leave, you can take up to, for teaching 39 weeks, you'll get some sort of pay, and then you can get 52 weeks. But you can share that first 39 weeks with the other parent of the child, so that while one of you is at work, the other person is at home, and you can swap that in, I think, up to about 3 blocks. So it's particularly beneficial for teachers because we're contracted over the holidays. We can return to work during the holidays, in inverted commas, return to work, but get paid for that. So you can get paid for being at work, but you're not actually in work because it's during the holidays. So that's a way of getting extra pay, but it can also benefit you in the way it's benefited us, that my husband has done it. And whilst I'm at work, he is at home with my child. So he's managed to get that time off at the same time. So that's been particularly beneficial for us.
So actually in that example, you're both at home together, aren't you? Because you're not actually at work.
That's
perfect. Yeah, that's amazing.
I've seen some examples, like case studies, well, not case studies, but just examples of people talking about it where they've actually ended up getting like 5-6 more weeks across the year of paid maternity leave. And like you said, maternity leave in teaching is so terrible compared to a lot of other private and public services. You know, we've compared it before, I think, with the police force. And so I don't blame anyone for wanting to do it, but I think the controversy comes a little bit around, it feels really cheeky because you're technically returning to work when, you know, when we know we're at home. And I think that puts off a lot of people. How do we get around this? How do we convince more people that teachers, we do so much work? Like this is this is the least that could be done for us as teachers. What do we do?
The way I've kind of looked at it is because obviously I sort of thought, oh, the more money they're paying me, the less money that's going to the kids. That's the kind of way that I sort of thought about it. But then I thought, well, firstly, I am contracted for those, you know, that is part of my work. I'm contracted for those times. I go over and above all the time as it is, but also it is a legitimate thing. It's a government scheme or policy, whatever you want to call it. It's not just for teachers. It's something that the government allowing anyone to do in the public sector. So why would you not take advantage of that? In the end, I sort of see it as money that's going to benefit my child. So why would I turn that down because I feel a bit guilty because other people are doing it? So I'm not going to get on my moral high horse and be like, well, I'm not going to take that money, because you better believe I am going to take that money if I get it. It's a bit like returning to work, which again is what I'm doing. And I was a bit dubious about it until a few people convinced me it's normal. I'm returning to work at the beginning of the summer holidays, because why would I not get that money over the summer holidays and then actually go back in September, which feels, again, it does feel cheeky, but I think we're so used to feeling guilty all the time as teachers for doing things that we think are maybe taking away from school or taking away from children, that we forget to look after ourselves. And you would recommend it to family and friends, so why would you not do it for yourself, basically?
It's so true. And I think something that I want to touch on there, what's really powerful is, and maybe you can talk to this as someone who's now had a child, do you feel like, because you alluded to it there, like, I'm going to take the money, it's my kid. Do you feel like when you've had your child and, you know, you've read about these schemes and it became more real that you were going to have this, you know, person who's dependent on you, did you feel more confident then to be able to go to SLT and kind of, in a way, there'll be some people out there at schools who are scared to do that, who like they don't have that open door policy, like you described it as a thing where you can go and speak to your SLT. I know a lot of women who I've spoken to about it whose response is they don't even necessarily feel guilty, but they don't feel like they can do that in their school. They feel like they're rocking the boat. They feel like it's going to be detrimental to them. And I've had someone say to me, well, I'm worried because even if they do put it through because it's all okay and I know it's legal, that they're going to treat me differently when I go back eventually.
I mean, I've had a few messages on Facebook about that, because I think I posted about it once and quite a few people DM'd me and said a similar thing. I mean, I totally get it, because you don't want to rock the boat. And I do think, I can only speak on behalf of being a woman, but I do think being a woman as well, you don't want to, you know, that you feel like you're taking the mick, taking 9 months plus out of work and being paid, even though it's not very much. But it is a full-time job and you need that time off to look after a child. And it's just, you know, kind of basic. You need the money to do it as well. But I just think it's actually, like, the government have allowed it to happen. So why should you not ask for it? The website Teacher SPL has loads of advice and help on there. And I think the lady who runs it, called Kinza, runs a service where she will write the letters for you, write the email for you, so that you've got all the proper language in place if you wanted to do it via email rather than in person. But it does take bravery to be the first person to step up and do it. But you just, I don't know. It's just, I get it. It's a brave thing to do, but you're going to benefit it from the end of the day. And you think if you want other women in your school, other women in other schools to be able to benefit from it, which you think most people do, then we need to make it more widely known, and more people need to take the step and actually ask for it.
And you're doing that now. That's what you're doing right now, which is why, you know, we really wanted you to get you on here as well and talk about it, because what you've done is really powerful. You've got to think, like, you've put a lot of money in a lot of mums' pockets.
I hope so.
You have. It's really good. And I know you've been brave and been the first person to do it yourself. And I think the more we normalize it, the better, because like you said, the government don't give us much, do they? No. So if they're going to let us do this, then absolutely we should be taking up.
I think the most powerful point you said there, and the one that I would use now if I'm ever talking to someone who's a bit like, oh, I don't know about it, to try and convince them, is the fact that, and you said this, you know, we already work in the holidays. We already give so much to this job. This job takes advantages of teachers to the nth degree, you know. Don't feel bad about this very, very, very small thing that you can take advantage of, because it's still a drop in the ocean compared to, you know, what your goodwill is going towards in this job. It's the least you are owed in this job. So take it. And
you are entitled to it. It's not them going over and above and doing you a favor. You're actually entitled to it. It's a bit like saying, oh, don't pay me over the summer holidays. Take off 6 weeks off my, like, you're not going to do that, are you? No. So you're entitled to it. It's just a shame it's not something that's a given. We actually have to ask for it rather than it being an automatic thing. Yeah. So
I think that'd be really powerful, wouldn't it, if schools to kind of take that approach of taking this, stepping out of the, you know, the back seat and saying, guys, you know, this is a thing that happens. If anyone is thinking of going on maternity, we're actively going to suggest this because it can only help you guys. And I think that would be such a powerful thing if maybe talking about it more, we can get more SLT, more people in charge to kind of be the first step so that they don't feel as awkward. That'd be really powerful, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd be so interested to know. And maybe we've got some SLT listeners out there, head teachers maybe. And Dylan, we usually do a poll on Spotify underneath our episode. I think we might do this as a poll because I'm so curious as to just who's heard of it before, particularly SLT. Have you even heard of it? Because I am willing to bet, just from my limited experience of schools and knowing staff, that a lot of SLT and head teachers have never even heard of it before.
Yeah, my school hadn't, and they had to go. I sent them the websites to say, I mean, they weren't unwilling, but they just wanted to know more about it. So I sent them the government website and the teacher SPL website, and they read up about it themselves because they had no idea about it.
Well, so maybe this is a change we can push. You know, maybe anyone out there, doesn't matter if you're benefiting from it or not. There's no harm in going to your SLT, you know, next week or whenever you're in, and saying, look, this is a thing. I think it would be a really, really good thing for well-being and something very nice for our school to promote and like take the lead on for teachers. You know, that could be a good move.
Yeah.
Good change.
Can I just add something on in case anyone's listening that is thinking, can they do it? I think you've got, you need to apply at least 8 weeks before the first kind of chunk that you want to take. So if you've already had a baby, it's not too late. You don't have to just apply when you're pregnant. So obviously I think summer's less than 8 weeks away actually, but the next one would be autumn half term. So as long as you apply at least 8 weeks before autumn half term, you can get that week paid. So if anyone's listening and they've had a baby but they think they can't get it, you can. Just saying that.
That is brilliant to know. I will just reiterate the website as well because I know it's so helpful and you mentioned it earlier. It's www.teachers, as in plural, spl.co.uk. So do visit that website.
We'll put a link in the description as well to this podcast. So if you listen to this, we'll have a link there as well. Okay, so every guest we get onto the podcast, we have asked to come with their favorite story from the classroom, because I know you guys love listening to these stories. It can be funny, it can be embarrassing, it can be really heartwarming. We've told a lot of different ones, Sophie. What kind of story have you brought for us today?
Embarrassing.
Oh, perfect. Good. Amazing. They're our favourites.
Yeah, so I still look back on this one and cringe and just want to be swallowed up into a hole. So I was an unqualified teacher at the time. It was like June or July, and I qualified to start in September, but my school had employed me to do some cover. So the teacher had left me, I think it was a science lesson, and they were doing research on infectious diseases. So all the children had an individual laptop out. And I was so conscientious because I knew my head was just going to come in and check on me to see if I was okay. And obviously I was going to be employed properly by that school in September. And I thought in my head, and I know now it's almost, when you think you've checked on every single child, you haven't. You think you have, but you haven't. So I was going around looking at every single child, watching what they were doing and writing down the notes. Anyway, I collected all the notes at the end on their research on infectious diseases to look through it. And I found 2 boys who sat next to each other, and they'd done research about STIs and all the different ways that prostitutes can share STIs with each other. And some of the words that they'd written down, I can't repeat on this podcast. And honestly, I did not know what to do with myself. And I went straight to my head and just admitted it. I think I was probably even crying. And luckily he found it funny, because thank goodness the 2 boys, their parents are both teachers. So he said, they will understand, trust me. So he sat with me, and I phoned them both to say, I'm really sorry, but they probably know these words and this is what they looked up. And thank goodness they both found it funny. But that was so embarrassing, and I don't think I lived that down for a while. So
You've been so careful ever since. Any research lesson, you'll go to this website and this website.
I just thought the school filters would pick it up. I don't know how that went through the school filters, but a lesson learned from then on. So there we go.
It is good though that their parents were teachers and not prostitutes, because then it would have been
That's true.
That's such a good story. I love going off on a tangent, like imagination in my head, and just imagining you'd never clocked on. How far would it have got?
I know.
Like, what would have happened?
I know.
Oh, God.
Exposes you. You're like, I read all of them. I read all of your research. They were so good. And the boys there are like, oh my God.
I'm going to do a presentation now. These 2 boys have volunteered to present in front of the whole school.
Can you imagine? Oh my goodness. It's not worth thinking about.
Oh, amazing. Well, that was a very good story. You set a very high bar there for our future guests. Thank you for sharing.
I love that. Sophie, I just want to say before we finish, because we're going to finish up there, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time. It was so useful, and I hope anyone listening has got as much out of that as we have. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been really fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Dylan, mate, I don't know about you, but I absolutely loved every single minute of that chat. Sophie, you're a fantastic guest. Thank you again for coming on. I really particularly enjoyed the conversation about SPL, because I'm just hoping that there are some teachers out there that have now listened to this and have got the courage to just go and talk to that SLT or do whatever it is to get the ball rolling with their shared parental leave. So thank you for sharing your wisdom.
My favorite part of that podcast was certainly the kind of idea of, Sophie definitely has this aura of this unbelievable teacher, and she is amazing, but she wasn't afraid to just say, well, actually, I do it like this sometimes, and it doesn't always work out. And that idea of actually being reflective, and there's no, these social media platforms sometimes can kind of give this idea of almost sometimes a toxic positivity of, you go above and beyond, you do all this, and you can feel a bit, oh, am I up to the standard? And she was so good at showing how she's amazing at her job, but a realist as well. And I think that'll help a lot of people.
Yeah, just a normal teacher. She made I felt better just listening to her, because I was like, oh, thank God she's just does these things that I do as well. We're all human. We can only do so much. I also particularly enjoyed the story. So thank you, Sophie, for setting the bar really high. That was really funny. I've been chuckling for ages at that. It did make me think though, if you guys have got any stories, this is why we want them. This is what we need. We need you to write in with your stories from the classroom. It can be funny. It can be anything for you that you want to share, and if it's good, we'll share it. And if it's not, we just won't. So don't worry about that. Dylan, I think it's time. I can't do this. I can't. All right. And maybe one day I'll have the courage. I think you, Dylan, need to share our handles for social media.
Now, I've got a confession to make, but I'll do it in a minute. Okay. So first of all, Instagram, Teach Sleep Repeat Podcast.
Sure.
You can find us there. Gmail, as always, teachsleeprepeatpod@gmail.com. And here's my confession. Big news. We're on Twitter now. Great news, right?
Nice.
But we have a new handle. We have another new handle for 2 reasons. Number 1, I want to annoy you because you really don't like the fact we have lots of different handles. But number 2, the other ones weren't actually available, okay? Or they were too long. So if you want to find us on Twitter, which is where we're at now, please do come and follow us. We will follow you back, of course. The handle, and I'm going to get this right, is @TeachSR Podcast. Come and find us on Twitter. Is that all right, Aiden?
Listen, if there's any budding podcasters out there, take this one bit of advice from us. And this is the number one bit of advice that we listened to when we started the podcast, which is if you want to grow and you want to be consistent, make sure that you have really long, complex, different handles for all of your social media. So you heard it here first, guys. That's how you run a podcast.
That is right, isn't it? Make yourselves as hard to find as possible. That's the right way to go. Anyway, really enjoyed that. Can't wait for more guests in the future. Guys, let us know if you enjoyed listening to Sophie, because I certainly absolutely loved being a part of that conversation. We'll see you again next time for another episode. Bye, everyone.